The rain fell steadily over New York City as James Walker sat in his small office, staring at old case files. The former detective had seen better days, but his reputation for solving impossible cases still brought clients to his door. Tonight was different, though. The woman who walked in wasn't supposed to exist. She appeared human at first, tall, elegant, wearing a gray suit that probably cost more than his yearly rent. But there was something off about her movements, too smooth, too perfect. The badge she placed on his desk made his eyes widen. Stellar Confederation Ambassador. "Mr. Walker," she said, her voice carrying an odd musical quality. "I need your help finding someone." James leaned back in his chair, the old wood creaking under his weight. "I don't handle government cases anymore, Ambassador. Not since I left the force." "This isn't a government case." Her fingers tapped the desk, making an unusual crystalline sound. "This is personal. My daughter is missing." He watched as she reached for her wrist, touching what looked like a simple bracelet. The air around her shimmered, and James found himself fighting the urge to jump from his chair. Where the woman had stood, a beam made of shifting crystal and light now towered, its form catching the dim office lights and splitting them into rainbow patterns across the walls. "This is what I really am, Mr. Walker. And this is why I had to break 17 different diplomatic protocols to be here tonight." James swallowed hard but kept his voice steady. "You're risking a lot coming here like this. Why me?" The crystalline being, the ambassador, moved closer. Her form seemed to flow rather than walk. "Because you understand loss, Mr. Walker. Your records show you've solved cases others abandoned. Cases involving missing children." Images of old cases flashed through his mind. The Thompson girl found in Seattle when everyone else said she was dead. The Martin twins rescued from a trafficking ring in Mexico. Cases where his gut feelings had proven right, even when the evidence said otherwise. "My daughter, May, disappeared 3 weeks ago," the ambassador continued. "Our best investigators have found nothing. Our technology, advanced as it is, has failed. But you humans, you have something we don't. Something we can't replicate." "And what's that?" James asked, though he had a feeling he knew the answer. "Instinct, unpredictability. The ability to make connections that defy logic, but somehow turn out right." She produced a small crystal, placing it on his desk. It glowed with a soft inner light. "This contains more knowledge than all of Earth's computers combined. Access to technology your species won't develop for centuries. It's yours, along with any price you name, if you help me find my daughter." James picked up the crystal, feeling its warm pulse against his palm. "This kind of technology isn't meant for humans yet. Giving it to me would break every law your Confederation has about developing civilizations. I don't care about laws anymore." The ambassador's crystalline form shimmered with what James recognized as desperation, despite her alien appearance. "I care about finding my child. The authorities say she likely died in a ship malfunction near the Edge Worlds, but I know she's alive. A mother knows." James set the crystal down and stood up, walking to his office window. The rain had gotten heavier, distorting the city lights into blurs of color not unlike the ambassador's true form. He thought about all the parents who had sat in his office over the years, holding on to hope when everyone else had given up. "Keep your crystal, Ambassador Rose," he said finally, turning back to face her. "If I take this case, I do it my way. Human way. No shortcuts with advanced tech. That's not what makes me good at what I do." The crystalline being shifted, and for a moment, James thought he saw surprise in her otherworldly form. "You would refuse such knowledge. Knowledge isn't what finds missing people. Understanding does. If your daughter is out there, we'll find her. But first, you need to tell me everything. Starting with why a high-ranking ambassador was near the Edgeworlds with her child in the first place." Ambassador Rose's form shimmered again, returning to her human appearance. She sank into the chair across from his desk, and for the first time, James saw past the alien being to something universal, a parent afraid for their child. "Very well, Mr. Walker. Let me tell you about the Edge Worlds, and why I never should have taken my May there. The Edge Worlds turned out to be exactly what they sounded like. The farthest reaches of mapped space, where rules bent and law enforcement rarely ventured. As Ambassador Rose spoke, James took notes in his old-fashioned notebook, a habit from his detective days that often earned him strange looks but had never failed him. May was against going there, Rose said, her human disguise's hands trembling slightly. She said it felt wrong. I should have listened to her. Tell me about the day she disappeared, James said, his pen moving steadily across the paper. We were there for a peace conference. The Edge Worlds have valuable mining resources, and the Confederation wanted to establish proper trade agreements with the local colonies. Rose's voice caught. May was helping me prepare documents in our quarters. I left for just 10 minutes to meet with a local representative. When I returned, she was gone. James looked up from his notes. No signs of struggle. None. But Rose reached into her suit pocket and pulled out what looked like a small shard of crystal. I found this under her desk. It's a piece of her. We don't break easily, Mr. Walker. James took the shard carefully. Unlike the technology crystal she had offered earlier, this one felt cold to the touch. Dead. You mentioned the local authorities think it was a ship malfunction. They claim she might have gone to the docking bay for some reason. There was an accident there the same day. A small private vessel's engine exploded. They found no bodies, but at the temperatures those engines burn. She stopped, unable to continue. James set the crystal shard down and opened his laptop. It was old and slow compared to newer models, but it worked. I need access to the passenger lists of all ships that left the station that day. Rose waved her hand, and suddenly his laptop screen filled with data. I've already checked every ship. Multiple times. Maybe. But you were looking for your daughter. I'm looking for patterns. James started scrolling through the lists, his eyes moving quickly over the names and destinations. 20 minutes passed in silence before he spoke again. There were 3 ships that left within an hour of May's disappearance. All private vessels, all headed to different destinations. But look at their crew manifests. Rose leaned forward, her perfect human disguise momentarily flickering with interest. Each ship had exactly 4 crew members. That's unusually small for private trading vessels in dangerous space. And all 3 ships were registered to different companies. But he turned the laptop so she could see better. All those companies were created within the last year. Shell companies, Rose whispered. But why wouldn't our investigators spot this? James smiled grimly. Because they were looking for sophisticated criminal operations. This is old school, basic. The kind of thing we saw on Earth decades ago, when trafficking rings were still learning how to hide. He typed quickly, pulling up more data. Your people's technology is incredible, but sometimes it makes you blind to simple tricks. Rose's disguise flickered again, her true crystalline form showing through for a moment. You think she was taken, but our security systems can be beaten if someone knows what they're doing. You said it yourself. The Edge Worlds have valuable resources, but maybe the most valuable resources aren't in the ground. James stood up and walked to his office's small window again. Someone's collecting special people, Ambassador. Your daughter wasn't taken randomly. She was targeted. How can you be so sure? James turned back to face her. Because in the week before your daughter disappeared, 3 other ships had engine accidents at different stations in the Edge Worlds, all with no bodies found. And I'm willing to bet if we look into who was on those stations at the time, we'll find more missing people, special ones, like May. Rose stood up so quickly her chair fell backward. We need to go there. Now. I have a ship waiting. No, James said firmly. First, we need to understand why they took her. And for that, we need to look closer to home. He picked up the cold crystal shard again. You said your people don't break easily. So who would know how to break one of you? Who would want to? Rose's human disguise completely dropped for a moment, her crystalline form pulsing with a mix of colors that James guessed meant fear and realization. There are rumors, stories of old experiments, but those labs were shut down centuries ago. Maybe on your worlds, James said quietly. But what about here, on Earth? James spent the next morning making calls to old contacts while Rose paced his office. Her human disguise walked back and forth, but her feet made no sound on the old wooden floor. It was easy to forget she wasn't really human until moments like these. Your methods are. She paused, searching for a polite word. Unusual. We have advanced tracking systems that could search every database on your planet in seconds. James hung up his phone and smiled. And that's exactly why we're not using them. Whoever took may knows how to hide from high-tech scanning, but they might not think to hide from a guy making phone calls from a dingy office. Did you learn anything useful? Rose asked, trying to hide her impatience. Maybe. James pulled out a worn map of the city and spread it across his desk. In the past 6 months, 3 research companies have set up labs in abandoned buildings around the city. All of them officially study new energy sources. All of them use more power than they should for energy research. Rose leaned over the map, her perfect features narrowing in concentration. You think one of them might be connected to May's disappearance? I think it's worth checking out. But first, James reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an old police badge. We need to do this properly. No alien tech, no shape-shifting. Just 2 normal people asking normal questions. Rose's form flickered slightly. You want me to act completely human? Exactly. These people, whoever they are, they're looking for aliens. So we need to be as human as possible. He stood up and grabbed his coat. Think you can handle that? For a moment, Rose's human disguise showed a flicker of what might have been amusement. I've spent 20 years studying human behavior, Mr. Walker. I can be more human than most humans. The first lab was a dead end. Genuine researchers working on solar panel efficiency. The second wasn't even worth entering. James took one look at the security setup and knew it was just a normal corporate facility. But the third building, tucked away in an industrial park near the river, made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Too quiet, he muttered as they walked around the perimeter. A lab this size should have dozens of employees coming and going. We've seen 3 people in 2 hours. Rose nodded, her movements carefully imperfect now, mimicking human awkwardness. The power usage readings are strange too. They spike every 12 hours, exactly on schedule. Like they're running regular experiments. James stopped walking and pretended to check his phone. Don't look now, but the camera on the corner just tracked us. Regular security cameras don't do that. Rose kept her face carefully neutral. What do? We give them something to track. James pulled out his badge again and started walking toward the front entrance with purpose. Follow my lead, and remember, completely human. The front desk guard was expecting them. James could tell by the way the man's hand was already reaching for the phone. Can I help you? James held up his badge. Detective Walker, working a missing persons case. Need to ask a few questions about your power usage. Sir, this is a private facility. You need a warrant. Actually, James cut in. According to City Ordinance 47B, any facility using more than 50,000 kilowatts per month is subject to routine safety inspections. Your last inspection was due 3 weeks ago. The guard hesitated, his hand still on the phone. James could feel Rose behind him, carefully maintaining her human act. This was the gamble. Would they risk drawing attention by turning away a routine inspection? I'll need to call my supervisor, the guard said finally. Of course. James smiled pleasantly. We'll wait. They were led to a small waiting room that smelled of fresh paint and cleaning supplies. Too clean, James thought. Like they cleaned it constantly, or like they needed to hide certain smells. They'll report us, Rose whispered once they were alone. I'm counting on it, James replied quietly. Right now, someone in this building is checking my background. They'll find out I'm not with the police anymore, that I specialize in missing persons cases. And then, they'll realize we're looking for someone. Rose finished, understanding dawning in her artificially human eyes. Exactly. And when they do, they'll make a mistake. People always do when they're scared. He settled into one of the waiting room chairs. Now we just have to wait and watch who comes to throw us out. The wait lasted exactly 17 minutes before the door opened. A tall man in a white lab coat entered, followed by 2 security guards. James noticed something odd about their movements. Too precise, like Rose's had been before she started pretending to be more human. "Detective Walker," the man said, smiling without warmth. "I'm Dr. White, head of research here. I understand you have questions about our power usage." James stood slowly, watching how the guards positioned themselves. Not quite human, but not like Rose either. Something in between. "That was just an excuse to get in the door, Doctor. We both know why I'm really here." The doctor's smile didn't change. "Yes, your background is quite interesting. Former police detective, now private investigator specializing in missing persons. Tell me, what brings someone with your expertise to our energy research facility?" "Maybe the fact that your energy research facility has better security than most military bases," James replied. He felt Rose tense beside him. "Or maybe it's because you're not really researching energy at all." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Dr. White's smile finally faded. "I think it's time for you to leave." "I'll leave when you tell me about the others," James said, taking a calculated risk. "The ones you took from the Edgeworld stations." The guards moved forward, but Dr. White held up his hand. Something flickered across his face, not like Rose's shape-shifting, but something else. Something engineered. "I'm not sure what you're talking about, Mr. Walker, but now I'm very curious how you know about the Edgeworlds at all." "The same way I know about the experiments," James said, watching the doctor's reactions carefully. "The same way I know you're not quite human yourself, are you, Doctor?" The guard on the left moved with impossible speed, grabbing James's arm. The grip was like steel, confirming his suspicions. Rose stepped forward, but James shook his head slightly. "Not yet." "Bring them both," Dr. White said. "It seems we need to have a longer conversation." They were led deeper into the facility, past locked doors and security checkpoints. James memorized each turn, each doorway. The building was bigger than it looked from outside. Most of it was underground. The air grew colder as they descended. "You're collecting them," James said as they walked. "Special ones, different species. But you're not just collecting them, are you? You're trying to make more." Dr. White glanced back at him. "You understand more than you should, Mr. Walker, but you're still missing the bigger picture." They stopped at a large observation window. Beyond it was a laboratory filled with strange equipment and containers. Dozens of containers lined the walls, each holding something that shifted and glowed. "We're not collecting them," Dr. White said, pressing his hand against the glass. "We're improving them. Every species has its limitations, even the most advanced ones, like your crystalline friend here." He turned to Rose, whose human disguise was starting to slip from stress. "Yes, Ambassador, we know what you are, just like we know what your daughter could become with the right adjustments." "Where is she?" Rose's voice cracked, her human form flickering dangerously. "Safe and improving. Her natural abilities were remarkable, but with our help, she'll be extraordinary. They all will." He gestured to the containers. "Every species has something to contribute to the greater whole. Strength, speed, adaptability, even humanity's chaos." James looked at the containers again, understanding dawning. "You're not just experimenting on them. You're trying to combine them. Create something new. Create something better," Dr. White corrected. "A perfect fusion of all species' best traits. No more limitations, no more boundaries." He smiled again. and this time his face shifted, showing something inhuman underneath. "Would you like to see what your daughter is becoming, Ambassador?" Rose's disguise finally shattered, her crystalline form blazing with light. The guards raised weapons, but Dr. White waved them down. "Don't worry. The security fields in this section were designed to contain much stronger beings than her. Though I must admit, I'm more interested in you right now, Mr. Walker. How did a simple human detective figure out so much?" James smiled grimly. "That's the thing about humans, Doctor. We're not as simple as you think. And you just made a big mistake." "Oh, and what mistake would that be?" "You brought us exactly where we wanted to go." Dr. White's smile faded as alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility. Red lights flashed in the corridors, and the sound of heavy security doors slamming echoed through the building. "What did you do?" he demanded, turning to James. "Me? Nothing." James shrugged, looking completely calm despite the chaos. "But you might want to check your power systems. Those spikes every 12 hours made it pretty easy to guess when your security would be weakest." Rose's crystalline form pulsed with understanding. While they had waited in the lobby, James had made one extra call to an old friend who knew how to overload power grids. The guards' weapons flickered and died as emergency power kicked in. Dr. White's engineered features twisted with rage. "Lock down the specimens. Don't let them." A crash from the laboratory cut him off. The containers along the walls were failing, their power supplies disrupted. One by one, their occupants were breaking free. Dr. White rushed to a control panel, his fingers flying over the keys. "Rose, now," James shouted. The crystalline ambassador charged forward, her form shattering the observation window. The guards tried to stop her, but their enhanced strength was useless against her natural form. She threw them aside like toys. James ran into the lab after her, ducking under sparking equipment. "Maze container. Which one?" "I can feel her," Rose called back, moving deeper into the chaos. Other beings were emerging from their containers, some humanoid, some completely alien. All of them looked angry. They found Maze container at the back of the lab. The young crystalline being inside was different from her mother. Parts of her natural form had been altered, changed into something new. She wasn't moving. "No," Rose whispered, her form dimming. "We're too late." "Stand back," James ordered, grabbing a piece of broken equipment. He smashed the container's control panel, and the field holding May disappeared. The young crystal being dropped into her mother's arms. "The changes we made are permanent." Dr. White's voice came from behind them. He held some kind of device in his hand. "She'll never be what she was, but she can be so much more. All of you can." "You're wrong," James said, stepping between the doctor and the crystalline beings. "Look around you. Every being you try to improve is turning on you. Your perfect fusion is falling apart." The facility shook as more explosions rocked the upper levels. The freed specimens were tearing the place apart. Dr. White's face shifted again, showing more of his engineered nature. "They don't understand. I made them better." "You made them different," James corrected. "That doesn't mean better. Some things aren't meant to be changed." A soft glow came from behind him. May was stirring in her mother's arms, her altered form slowly brightening. But instead of the pure crystal light of her mother, her glow pulsed with rainbow colors, like an aurora. "May?" Rose's voice trembled. The young crystal being rose, her form unstable but beautiful in its new complexity. She looked at Dr. White, and suddenly all his screens and devices went dark. The engineering in his own body seemed to freeze. "How?" the doctor gasped, staggering. "You gave her control over energy," James realized. "But you never thought she'd use it against you." May's form pulsed once, and Dr. White collapsed, his engineered systems completely shut down. Around them, the facility continued to fall apart as the other freed specimens took their revenge on their prison. "We need to go," James said, looking at the exit. "This whole place is going to collapse." Rose held her daughter close, both their forms glowing brighter. "May, can you move?" The young crystal being's new form sparkled in response. She raised what might have been an arm, and energy crackled around them. James felt a strange tingling sensation. "She's protecting us," Rose said with wonder. "She's using what they did to her to save us." They ran through the chaos of the collapsing facility, May's energy shield deflecting falling debris and keeping other specimens from accidentally harming them in their rage. James led the way, remembering every turn from their journey down. Behind them, Dr. White's perfect laboratory crumbled, his experiments ending not with a triumph of engineering, but with the power of a mother's love and a daughter's will to survive. Getting out of the underground lab turned out to be harder than getting in. The main exits were blocked by security systems running on backup power, and the freed specimens had turned the upper levels into a war zone. James, Rose, and May found themselves trapped in a middle corridor, with chaos above and sealed doors below. "The backup generators will keep the security doors locked," James said, catching his breath. "They're designed to contain anything trying to break out." Rose's crystalline form flickered with frustration. "I could try to break through, but it would take time we don't have." May floated between them, her new rainbow-colored form pulsing with energy. She reached toward the nearest security door, but even her new powers couldn't override it directly. James watched her attempt and smiled suddenly. "May, wait. You're thinking like they would expect, trying to overpower the system. But that's not how humans solve problems." The young crystal being turned to him, her form showing curiosity in its shifting colors. Rose also moved closer, interested. "These doors are designed to stop strong things from breaking out," James explained. "But what if we're not trying to break out? What if we're trying to break in?" May's form sparkled, not understanding. But Rose's crystal structure changed slightly as she caught on. "The safety protocols." "Exactly," James grinned. "Every secure facility has safety protocols. Fire suppression, emergency ventilation, things that have to work even if everything else fails." He pointed to a small control panel near the floor. "May, can you make the system think there's a fire in the secure areas?" The young crystal being's colors swirled as she processed this idea. She reached out again, but this time, instead of attacking the door directly, she sent tiny pulses of energy into the environmental sensors. One by one, they started reporting a massive fire in the lower levels. The effect was immediate. Emergency systems kicked in, overriding the security lockdown. Doors began opening automatically as the facility's fire protocols activated, trying to vent the non-existent smoke. "That's my girl," Rose whispered proudly. They moved quickly through the opening doors, but their progress was soon blocked by a group of guards. More of Dr. White's enhanced humans. Unlike the ones upstairs, these still had working weapons. "Stop right there," the lead guard ordered, raising his weapon. "Doctor's orders. The specimens don't leave." James stepped forward, keeping his hands visible. "Think about what you're doing. The whole facility is falling apart. Whatever the doctor promised you, it's over." "It's not over," the guard snapped. "We're making history here, creating the next step in evolution." "No," James said calmly. "You're just proving why humans are more dangerous than any enhanced being." He took another step forward. "Want to know why?" The guard's enhanced reflexes should have let him shoot James instantly. But he hesitated, just for a second. "Why?" "Because we lie." James dropped and rolled as the sprinkler system suddenly activated above them, part of the fire protocol he'd had May trigger. The guards looked up instinctively, their enhanced senses overwhelmed by the sudden spray of water. That moment of distraction was all Rose needed. Her crystalline form flashed through the corridor like lightning, disarming the guards before they could recover. May's energy field followed, shorting out their enhanced systems. "Humans don't fight fair," James explained to the stunned guards as he stood up. "We don't follow the expected patterns. That's why your boss wanted to study us. But he never understood that our real strength isn't in our bodies or our brains. It's in our ability to do the unexpected." They left the guards behind, moving quickly toward the surface. The corridors were clearer now. Most of the other specimens had already escaped. They could hear sirens in the distance. "The authorities will be here soon," Rose said as they neared the exit. "Human and Confederation both." "Good," James replied. "They need to see this. Need to understand what happens when people try to improve things that aren't meant to be improved." May's form pulsed with agreement, her new rainbow colors creating beautiful patterns on the walls. She wasn't what she had been before, but maybe that wasn't a bad thing. She had taken what was done to her and made it her own. They emerged from the facility into the night air. Behind them, the building continued to collapse, taking Dr. White's twisted dreams with it. But his failure had proved something important. Sometimes the most powerful ability isn't strength or speed or even energy control. Sometimes the most powerful ability is simply being human. A week after the facility's destruction, James sat in his office looking at the morning news. The headlines were still talking about the industrial accident that had destroyed the research center. The truth, as usual, had been quietly covered up by both human and alien authorities. The door opened and Rose entered, in her human disguise again, followed by May. The young crystal being had chosen to maintain a human form as well, though hers shimmered occasionally with rainbow colors that her mother's didn't. "The cleanup is finished," Rose said, sitting down across from James. "All the escaped specimens have been found and are being returned to their homes. Those who want to be returned, at least. Some have chosen to stay on Earth." "And Dr. White?" James asked, though he already knew the answer. "Gone, along with most of his research team. The Confederation thinks they had other facilities, but," she shrugged, "they're looking in all the wrong places, using all their advanced technology." James smiled. "And finding nothing, I bet. People like that don't hide where you'd expect them to." May moved to the window, looking out at the city. Her human form was young, maybe 16, with dark hair that seemed to catch impossible colors in the sunlight. "I found others like me," she said softly. "People he changed. We can sense each other now." James sat up straighter. This was new information. "How many?" "Dozens, not just from the facility here. They're scattered across Earth and the edge worlds." She turned back to face them. "They're scared, confused. Some of them can't go home because their own people don't understand what they've become." Rose's human disguise flickered slightly, a sign of distress James had learned to recognize. "May, we talked about this. The Confederation can help them." "No," May said firmly. "The Confederation doesn't understand. They want to study us, just like he did. They think we're dangerous because we're different." James leaned back in his chair, beginning to understand where this was going. "And what do you want to do about it?" May smiled, a very human expression on her not quite human face. "We need help. Someone who understands what it's like to be underestimated. Someone who knows how to find people who don't want to be found." She looked directly at James. "Someone human." Rose stood up suddenly. "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. The Confederation would never approve." "The Confederation doesn't need to know," James said quietly, "just like they don't need to know about what really happened at that facility. Sometimes the best way to help people is to work outside the system." May nodded eagerly. "We could help them. Show them how to adapt, like I did. And maybe," she hesitated, "maybe we could find others who were taken. There might be more facilities." James looked at Rose, who was standing very still, a sure sign she was thinking hard. "Your daughter has a point, Ambassador. These people need help that the Confederation can't give them. They need someone who understands being different." Rose's human disguise shimmered as she sighed. "You're both impossible, just like all humans." But there was affection in her voice. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A new kind of missing persons agency," James said, warming to the idea, "specializing in cases that fall between the cracks of human and alien authority. May can help find them. I can help them hide or adapt. And you?" He smiled at Rose. "You can keep the Confederation looking in all the wrong places." "That's dangerously close to treason," Rose pointed out. "No," May said, her form glowing slightly through her human disguise. "It's justice. For everyone Dr. White hurt. For everyone like me." James stood up and walked to his office window, looking out at the city with May. Somewhere out there, changed beings were hiding, scared and alone. And somewhere, Dr. White was probably starting over, continuing his twisted experiments. "So," he said, turning back to Rose, "what do you say, Ambassador? Ready to break a few more diplomatic protocols?" Rose looked at her daughter, who was practically glowing with excitement, then back at James. Her human face broke into a very undiplomatic grin. "Well," she said, "I suppose humans aren't the only ones who can learn to be unpredictable."